Here is the fully revised and quality-controlled script. The tapping started at 2 in the morning. Not a crash. Not the explosive impact of an animal trying to break through something. Just a steady, rhythmic knocking on the reinforced cabin window. The kind of sound that pulls you out of deep sleep with the immediate certainty that something is wrong without telling you what. Daniel Hayes was on his feet before he was fully awake. 11 years of Arctic fieldwork does that to you. Your body learns to treat unfamiliar sounds at night as information requiring immediate assessment, and it stops waiting for your conscious mind to catch up before getting vertical. He crossed the cabin in the dark and looked through the glass. She was right there. A full-grown female polar bear, her muzzle maybe 30 centimeters from the window, close enough that her breath was fogging the outer surface in slow, rhythmic pulses. Her fur was matted with frost along her shoulders and the top of her head, the way a bear looks when she has been moving hard through cold air for a long time without stopping. Her eyes were open, and they were looking directly through the glass at Daniel, with an expression that stopped every prepared response he had in its tracks. He had looked into the eyes of polar bears before. At distance, through a camera, occasionally far too close for comfort. He knew what a curious bear looked like. He knew what an aggressive bear looked like. He knew the flat predatory assessment of an animal deciding whether something was worth the energy. This was none of those things. He stood in the dark cabin in his thermal base layer and looked at a mother bear pressing her enormous face against his window at 2 in the morning and felt the specific chill of encountering something he did not have a category for. She tapped the glass again. The same deliberate knock, patient and insistent and completely without aggression. Marcus appeared at Daniel's shoulder, then Rita, both drawn by the sound, both going still when they saw what was on the other side of the window. Nobody spoke. The bear held her position and looked at them and knocked again. "She is trying to tell us something," Rita said quietly. That sentence should have sounded like an overreach. In any other context, it would have, but standing in a dark Arctic cabin at 2 in the morning watching a wild polar bear knock on your window with the focused patience of an animal that has made a decision and is waiting for you to catch up, the sentence felt less like interpretation and more like plain description. Daniel pulled on his parka. He reached for the door. Marcus grabbed his arm. "You are not going out there. Watch her eyes," Daniel said. "She is not hunting." He opened the door. The cold hit him like a wall. The particular Arctic cold of a clear night that has had all day to deepen. And the bear was right there, 2 meters away. Her full size suddenly real in a way that the window had compressed. She was large. Larger than she had looked through the glass. Her shoulders were level with Daniel's chest, and she outweighed him by enough that the concept of physical resistance was not worth thinking about. She looked at him for a moment, then she turned and walked away from the cabin. 3 steps. Stopped. Looked back over her shoulder. Daniel felt something move through him that he recognized from a year ago on a different piece of ice in a different storm. The same quality of recognition. The same animal asking him to follow, and his entire rational mind generating reasons not to, while something quieter and more certain said go. He went. She led him around the side of the cabin to a snowbank maybe 20 meters from the structure, moving at a pace that kept her just ahead of him, checking back every few steps with that same focused attention she had brought to the window. Marcus and Rita were behind Daniel. He could hear their boots on the packed snow, and he was grateful for that without turning to confirm it. What he found at the snowbank stopped him in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The cub was small, maybe 5 months old. with the oversized paws and slightly uncoordinated quality of a young bear still growing into his body. He was lying on his side in the snow, and he was not still. His small body was moving in the irregular, convulsive way that living things move when something inside them is going very wrong, a rhythmic shuddering that had nothing voluntary in it. His breathing was audible from 3 meters away, a wet, labored sound that needed no medical training to recognize as serious. Around his muzzle, visible even in the low light, was a discoloration, a faint blue-gray tinting at the edges of his lips and along the gum line. Rita was already crouching beside him, pulling on examination gloves, her voice dropping into the flat, precise register she used when she was working fast and needed her emotions somewhere else. "Chemical exposure," she said. "The saliva discoloration and the convulsive pattern are consistent with toxic ingestion. He needs intervention right now." Daniel looked up from the cub to the mother. She was standing 2 meters away, her full weight forward on her front legs, her eyes moving between the cub and the humans, crouching beside him with an intensity that made the air feel pressurized. Every line of her body said that she was one wrong movement away from a response that would end the situation in the worst possible way. And yet, she was not moving. She had brought them here. She was holding herself at the edge of everything her instincts were telling her to do, and she was waiting. Do you understand what that cost her? Think about that for a second. Every impulse in her body was telling her to act, to protect, to drive the threat away from the thing she loved most. And instead, she was standing still because some part of her had made a calculation that stillness was the only thing that could save him. That is not simple animal behavior. That is a decision made under the most extreme pressure a mother of any species can face. Rita worked quickly. The mobile medical kit contained broad-spectrum antitoxin compounds and activated charcoal neutralizers, standard equipment for a research team operating in an environment where industrial contamination events were an increasing reality. She drew the antitoxin with hands that were steady in a way Daniel found remarkable given everything pressing in around them. Marcus crouched at the edge of the group, not close enough to crowd the procedure, close enough to be useful, his eyes moving between Rita's hands and the mother bear with the focused attention of someone who has fully understood the stakes and decided that understanding them clearly is the most useful thing he can do right now. The cub needed to be still enough for the injection. He was not still. Getting a clean line into a moving animal in sub-zero temperatures by lamplight with a mother bear 2 meters away was the most precise and most terrifying thing Daniel had ever witnessed up close. "Talk to her," Rita said without looking up. "Keep her attention on you. Keep your voice calm." Daniel turned to face the mother and did something that felt completely insane and completely necessary at the same time. He talked to her. Not commands. Not deterrent language, just his voice, low and steady, telling her in plain language what was happening. That they were helping. That the cub needed medicine. That she had done the right thing by coming to the window. She held her position and watched him, and the intensity in her eyes did not soften, but it did not escalate either. She was listening, not to the words, to the quality underneath them, to the difference between a voice that meant harm and a voice that meant something else. I want you to think about what is happening in this moment. 3 humans crouched in the snow at 2 a.m. in sub-zero temperatures, working as fast and as carefully as they can, while a wild predator stands 2 meters away and chooses, over and over again with every passing second, not to stop them. That choice is being made continuously. It is not made once and then settled. Every second she holds her position is another second of the same impossible decision. Rita administered the antitoxin in 2 careful stages, The cub shuddered hard at the first injection, and the mother shifted her weight forward, and Daniel kept talking, and she stopped. Her breath was coming in visible clouds in the cold air, fast and shallow, and her eyes never left her cub for more than a second at a time. The second injection went in clean. Then they waited. The minutes that followed were the longest Daniel had spent in the Arctic. He crouched in the snow beside Rita and watched the cub's breathing and talked to the mother in a low, continuous voice and felt time moving in a way that had nothing to do with clocks. The mother stood in the dark and watched her cub with an expression that needed no translation. It was the same expression that any living thing wears when it is waiting to find out if the thing it loves most is going to be all right. 4 minutes after the second injection, the convulsions slowed. The irregular shuddering became less frequent. The intervals between episodes stretching. The cub's breathing, losing some of its labored quality and finding a rhythm that was still fragile but no longer desperate. Rita exhaled. Her first real exhale in 20 minutes. "Still critical," she said quietly. "But the toxin is being neutralized. His system is responding." Daniel looked at the mother. Something had changed in her body. The forward lean of her weight had eased. Her head was still up and her eyes were still moving between the cub and the humans. But the pressurized quality around her had shifted. Then she did something that said more than anything else that had happened that night. She sat down in the snow. That large body settling from full alert onto the frozen ground. That single movement carried more weight than any behavior Daniel had documented in 11 years of Arctic filming. It was exhaustion and relief, and something that sat between trust and surrender. The particular release of a creature who has done everything she could and is now waiting to find out if it was enough. Now, here is something worth understanding before we get to the rest of this. The source of the poisoning was a permafrost melt site about 3 kilometers from the cabin. The warming had reached a buried industrial runoff deposit from a facility that had operated in the region over a decade earlier. And the chemical compounds had leached into a meltwater channel the cub had almost certainly accessed while his mother was hunting. The runoff site was not on any current monitoring registry. It was one of an unknown number of similar sites distributed across a region where the ground is opening in ways that nobody fully mapped when the deposits went in. The Arctic permafrost holds decades of industrial history in suspension, and the accelerating thaw is returning it to the surface, one melt season at a time. The cub was lying in the snow because of something humans had buried and forgotten. His mother was sitting in the dark, waiting to find out if the humans who caused the problem could also fix it. That is a weight worth carrying. The cub stood up for the first time just before dawn. Unsteady, his oversized paws finding the snow surface with the careful deliberateness of an animal relearning something it thought it already knew. He stood for a moment and swayed and then found his balance and held it. He turned his head and found his mother and made a sound that Daniel had never heard a bear cub make before. She was on her feet immediately. She crossed to him and pressed her muzzle into his neck and held it there, her eyes closing for a moment in the way that living things close their eyes when they are feeling something they cannot otherwise show. Daniel lowered the camera. Some things are not content. Some things just belong to the animals they happen to, and to the people lucky enough to be standing nearby in the dark. The mother looked at Daniel once before they left, a single direct look, brief and clear. The same quality of attention she had brought to the window when she first knocked. He held it for the moment she offered, and then she turned and moved away across the snow with the cub walking close at her side. Unsteady but moving, alive in the early Arctic morning light. They were gone before the sun fully cleared the horizon. The runoff site was reported and documented and added to a monitoring registry that should never have been allowed to lapse. The arguments about funding and jurisdiction and responsibility that followed were familiar ones. They will continue the way those arguments continue, slowly and incompletely, while the permafrost keeps opening and the compounds inside it keep finding their way into the water that Arctic animals drink. What happened at that cabin window at 2 in the morning sits outside the categories that any report can fully contain. A wild predator made a decision to seek human help, to stand still while strangers saved her cub, to trust a calculation she had every biological reason not to trust. She came to a window and knocked until someone opened the door. The cub was alive in the morning light. Whatever we decide that means, we have to decide it before the next one comes knocking.